Okay, so the next question that we have today is asking us, what is the square root expression as an imaginary number of the square root of 64? Pretty much what it's asking is, what is this? Okay, now, sometimes in earlier math education, people will tell you you can absolutely not take the square root of a negative number. And that is kind of a reasonable thing to believe. Like, ask your calculator, what's the square root of a negative number? And it's going to say error. It's like, okay, I guess error is the answer. Yeah, there's no real number answer, but a long time ago, there were some very smart people that said the math that we have already is not difficult enough. Let's make it more difficult by making imaginary numbers. That's not actually the reason why, but we have imaginary numbers that are a little bit more complicated. They're also known as complex numbers, but they're nothing to be scared about. So the fundamental relationship is that we just said, how we said we can never take the square root of a negative number? Forget that. I'm just going to say we can, and we always will be able to under the following principle. If we just say the square root of negative 1 is equal to I, or if we say I squared is equal to negative 1, knowing this, all of a sudden that rule of no negatives under the root, we get rid of that rule. We are big kids now. We can handle that now with this fundamental relationship. Okay, so essentially how we do this is, as we know, we can factor out things that are under the root. So what happens if under the root here we factored out a negative 1 times 64? Well, another way that we can rewrite this is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 64. Hopefully, all of us are well familiar of the fact that 8 times 8 is 64. So, you could also write this as negative 1 times 8 squared. We're not really going to worry about plus minus right now. Let's just worry about like the absolute value. Okay, so given here, we know that the square root of negative 1 is going to be I, and well, the square root of 8 squared, well, that's just got to be 8. But oftentimes we prefer to write it as 8I because I is kind of like a variable, and it's kind of nice to treat it that way. Okay, yeah, cool. So 8I is going to be the result of this. And as long as you keep in mind the fundamental relationship that the square root of a negative 1 is equal to I, and then you factor out the negatives when you have negatives under the root, everything will be good. And if you ever square the I, just make sure it becomes negative 1. Okay, so all of that is cool. And it would be more formal to say this is actually like plus minus, because really what it could be is negative 1 under the root of negative 8 squared. So because of that, we want to incorporate the plus minus. Okay, so it's not like always super important, but sometimes if you ever get like inconsistencies, that could be a reason why. Okay, so the above solution is good. Answer be better with plus minus as negative 8 and positive 8 are the square root of 64. Cool.